Patrick.
And
This is
Yes,
But Why
podcast. So, Ian, the first thing I want to ask you about is something that I think the whole internet is interested in, which is your mustache. Do you currently have a mustache on your face?
I will when I'm there. I don't at the moment, to be honest with you.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, but I will at the festival, I'm sure.
It was in the top Google searches with your name. It was
Really?
like top 3. Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
Glad to hear that. Glad to hear that.
I feel like that's a brand.
To adjust those metrics, and I'm glad that my mustache is part of that.
It's good that you're paying attention to those kinds of things. SEO with relation to your facial hair, very important. Very important.
It's very true.
Yeah. Have you always had a mustache? Or I guess you don't write at this very moment. So do you go in and out? Is it like a stage mustache? This is your on-stage character guy?
It's a real mustache. It's a real mustache that I grow on my face. That's my mustache. And I said, when I started out, I said, I need something to really amp up my SEO. And there were several choices in front of me. Weird hands. Some comedians go with weird hands. Other people will choose like a flashy outfit. For me, I thought a mustache. So that's what I have.
Yeah, I saw your, when I was researching you, I saw a page on, I guess your agent's website, and your headshot, you do not have a mustache. And I was like, oh, this guy, look at this guy. And it looks so different. It's so crazy how one tiny section of hair just totally changes your whole look.
Right. Yeah. It's like Superman, Clark Kent, glasses, you know? Yes, that's the thing.
It is.
It's like if I want to escape into obscurity, with people just like, give us the mustache outside my window, all I have to do is shave, I can walk right out the door.
Yep. They'd be like, excuse me, sir, we're trying to yell at the guy with the mustache inside. No problem.
Right. Yep. I can just walk right out. It's great. You guys got to try it. It's wonderful. Everybody listening right now, tweeted me that you've tried it, and I'll congratulate you personally.
Yes. Oh man, you've got to do the Clark Kent here. It is so crazy how that is. Like, I don't know, I'm just looking at them right now, and it's like, it's so crazy. I can't grow a mustache, so I don't have this power. I have glasses, and when I take off my glasses, my baby laughs so hard. Like, me without glasses is a ridiculous face, but me with glasses is totally fine.
Funny.
That's totally all right. But whenever I take them off to like clean them or something, he'll be like, oh, okay, all right. All right, enough with that. He like points and laughs. It's ridiculous. He doesn't speak words yet, but when he does, I'm sure he'll go, what's with that face? And I'll have a joke about it.
Right. There you go. Perfect.
So, Ian, how did you get started in theater or stand-up or comedy?
Oh, let's see. I grew up in Southern California, and then not in L.A. People think you grew up in Southern California, that means you grew up in L.A. I grew up a few hours outside of L.A., and that's a big difference. It's a totally different world. L.A. is its own ecosystem, and I was aware of L.A., but I did not grow up in it. Then I went to college. I liked writing. I liked performing. I figured, how can I do both at once? And stand-up kind of revealed itself to me, and I said, I'm going to try that. Moved to Chicago and started doing stand-up and producing fun, weird shows, and then moved to L.A. And that all happened in the last week, so I'm here now.
Wow,
you've been doing comedy for about 2 weeks, and yeah, that's it.
Man, what a wonderful turnaround for you. You're doing good.
Thank you very much.
Happy 21st birthday, by the way.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
You said you wanted to go to college for performing and writing. Did you actually go to college for it, or did you go to college, realize you wanted to perform and write, and leave college?
I went to college as an English major thinking I would be a novelist. And then I know. And then I...
you still can be.
Thought, I could be. Yeah.
Somebody you'll be in your 50s.
Okay, what if I was I thought I was going to be a playwright for a while. I switched to theater. And then, I started realizing comedy writing was a thing. At first I thought I should, this is like a podcast about how comedy works and stuff, right?
It's a podcast about how your journey affects you and what you do. So whatever story you have, I'm excited to hear it.
Right. I don't normally like to talk about the inner workings of comedy, except in maybe a context like this. So I didn't want to ramble on and on, waxing poetic about what is and is not funny, but this is a more appropriate context to talk about such things.
Sure. Plus, I'm always so interested in people who you were talking about. You started your writing career and you were going to be a novelist, and then you were going to be a playwright. Mm-hmm. And then you were like, but wait, there's this other thing I could do, stand up. And that's what got you into it. I think it's so interesting that you came at it from the writing perspective. Because I came at it from the performing perspective. I just want people to look at me and I just want to stand up on stage. I don't care if what I'm saying is good or bad. If you're looking at me, I'm good. Which is probably why I'm not a famous stand-up right now. But I find it fascinating that you came at it from a writing perspective. So tell me what happened that got you from playwright to stand-up. And whatever story you were about to tell about writing.
In high school and in college, I did acting, but the idea of trying to pursue acting sounded so odd and impossible. Like I can describe to you on some level, even then I could describe like, this is how you get better as a comedian or as a writer, as an actor. It's like, okay, so somehow I figure out how to get into an audition, and then I get good at auditions, and somehow they book me if I look okay. And that just seemed like so many weird variables that I never thought, you know what, I want to act. But I did like performing, and I started reading up on vaudeville, and I thought it was so cool that in vaudeville they would spend their whole lives working on these 5-10 minute acts that they would just work over and over again every night, trying to really perfect it. And I remember saying to my college advisor, like, you know, what I really want to do, I just wish that I could write and perform what I wrote every night. That's what I wish I could do, not even realizing that stand-up was a thing. And I used to think, you know what, if I go into life just saying, like, I will write anything at all, cast as wide a net as possible, then that's the way to figure out a career. And then what I've actually found is the opposite of that. You want to get more and more specific. That's what I've found works for me is, you know, I want to write comedy. Okay, well, there's so many different ways. You can write comedy for magazines. You could write it for TV. Let's say you want to write it for TV. Do you want to write a sitcom? Okay, you want to write a sitcom as opposed to late night? Well, do you want to write a 3-camera sitcom? Do you want to write for a 1-camera sitcom? And if you want to write for a 1-camera sitcom, is that like a network sitcom? You just like can get so specific and really specialize in these types, and that makes you the appealing candidate for somebody who's trying to hire that. None of those goals were necessarily mine, but I thought it's helped me figure out the type of stand-up that I want to do. You know, that I know what I want to do and how to kind of play my strengths as a stand-up. And hopefully I'm still learning more about that and maybe getting more specific. But, yeah.
That's really fascinating. I really like that.
That was a lot, yeah.
No, it was great. I really appreciate that. It's very smart too, and also with reference to getting closer to the details, like even in your example of like, if you want to write a sitcom, do you want to write it this way or that? It's like, oh yeah, of course. And they're different, and you have to learn the different ways to do that. And then you have to, figure out what, say you're going to actually sell it. Then you have to figure out what within this tiny genre is something that somebody wants to buy. Like, oh, so interesting. All the like tiny little details that are that. So was that first question, did your college counselor say, go do stand up? Or were they just like, I don't know. That's an interesting query. You would like to perform what you write?
They knew I was obsessed with vaudeville, and they literally said to me, Ian, vaudeville's been gone for decades. They knew that that's what I really wanted. And so they were like, you can't just say like, you want to do vaudeville. Vaudeville doesn't exist. And I was like, well, I guess that's true. But then a few years later, I found that I was able to do that in my own way with stand-up. So that was very satisfying.
Huh. As far as doing stand-up, have you found, when you started, you were in Chicago, you said, were you working in, and I don't know the names of clubs in Chicago or anything, but were you working in rooms that one might refer to as alt rooms?
Yeah, that's a funny divide that is both very real and completely imaginary. It's because you might say that alt is anything that's not a club, but then the best show in Chicago is called Comedians You Should Know, and the tone of it is definitely not what you might think of as alt. But it's like it's in a bar, but it's so professionally run. They have like their own menus, always incredible talent. It's truly like an amazing show. But then I am a much more what you think of as alt comedian. I'm weird. I'll do, I electrocute myself on stage. I have cue cards. I'll do all kinds of fun, weird stuff, which is not what you think of as club comedy. But then a show like Comedians You Should Know, is it alt? Is it club? I mean, it's like, I don't know. It's a great show. It's for people that it feels like maybe more traditional stand-up, but in like a modern way. But it's not a club. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I appreciate the idea of rejecting the labels entirely. The stand-up place is where...
But I think they can be helpful, and I think it is real. I think there are comics that are built for clubs and comics that are built for alt spaces, and I always wanted to be a comedian that could work clubs, but was definitely more in the alt space. That was always kind of my goal.
Yeah. Well, I just know that, like in the stand-up world, there's a lot of like, stand-ups like to make dividing lines so that it's like, I'm better than you because X, and so sometimes when I started hearing people referring to the quote alt rooms, I was like, oh, I see. They're trying to make the idea of anything that's not just a guy in a microphone saying the same jokes is weird, and so then less than. When I was in New York, all the open mics that I went to were weird and crazy. You could do anything on stage. It wasn't just stand-up. There were like naked people doing poetry, and like, people covering themselves with, milk in a baby pool. Like it was everything. And so whenever they invented the phrase alt, I was like, oh, that was what we were doing. That was that crap.
Right.
And then when I hear other people talking about it, I'm like, oh no, their alt seems less weird than mine. So what does that mean? So I just wondered, because I don't know much about Chicago. What's the scene there like? Did you find it welcoming when you came there from Southern California? Did you have a lot of great friends? What ended up making you move on from it?
I'm definitely biased, but I definitely think it's the best place to start. as a stand-up. It's easy for me to say that because that's where I started, but I think that I think it's like right in the Midwest. It has every type of room in it. You can get those like big, crazy, messy, insane shows. You can get the more thoughtful, provoking, trying like it'll not drenching yourself in milk, but still that different type of alt. And I say that as the kind of guy who leans towards being drenched in milk. So that's not to disparage that. And then it also has great clubs. The Laugh Factory in Chicago is such a great club. That is an amazing club. I feel like anybody from Austin, Chicago, or Denver could make the argument that they that's the best place to start. I mean, other places I'm sure too, but I of course feel like Chicago is the place to start, just because you can get so many different types of stage time and so much stage time. It's just a great place to really experiment.
So once you got there, you were like, okay, I'm doing this, I'm working, let's get involved. You just jumped right in as soon as you moved there?
My first year, I made some web series. I moved there with my friend Tim Barnes, who's a stand-up in New York now. And we made some web series together. I took some improv classes. I was doing stand-up, just kind of feeling out where I would what I liked the most, like what kind of I was drawn towards, and eventually found that was stand-up for me. So once I realized that was everything I ate, slept, and breathed was stand-up. And trying to get on stage as much as possible, doing open mics, shows, learning how to produce and market shows, because that's a big part of comedy. I'm sure you know, getting people out to shows isn't easy, and that's like its own little sub skill that
Yeah, it's hard to it sometimes can be hard to not have both. You're like, but I'm great on stage, why doesn't anyone come to my shows?
Yeah,
but yeah, you do have to do it yourself.
People who are better at marketing than they are at comedy, that exists too. And you definitely want if you want to be a comedian, then you definitely want to have being a comedian be the most important thing. But learning those other skills, it's another way to look at it, is a skill that you can really work on and develop.
You're so nice to think of marketing as this, like, you think of it so sweetly. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are like, I'm figuring out how to do it so I can quit doing it once I get an agent and a manager, and then they can take care of it. Like,
yeah, anybody who's thinking that is going to be sorely mistaken. It never goes away because, as you said, did you talk to my agent and manager to book this? No, you talked to me.
No, I talked to you.
And yeah, that's just how it goes. It doesn't go away. You have to learn how to self-promote. If you get representation, then it becomes like another. It's helpful, and it becomes a tool for you. But it's not. They're not a rocket ship that gets you to the moon. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, I hear you. I'm just, hearing, I often talk to people about the difficulties of trying to get somebody to a show. And it's like, hey man, just throw stuff at the wall until it sticks, and then keep doing it. Whatever you find that works out, every town's going to be different, but in some towns there's a couple of, avenues of marketing that just somehow gets everybody in the door. So go with them. But yeah, but I do appreciate the sort of lovely educational way that you look at it. It's a skill that you're developing. You're working on it. That's so great. So How many years were you in Chicago before you decided to move to LA?
For me, it was 3 years.
3 years.
But that number is different for everybody. Some people are there longer. Some people are there less time. There are wonderful people who are doing great that were there way longer than I was. So it's really a different thing for everybody. But for me, it made sense for me to leave after 3 years.
Right on. Was there a reason why you left? Was there an opportunity that brought you to Los Angeles, or were you just, feeling like you had done all the things in Chicago that you needed to do? You crossed off everything off your bucket list and you're moving on?
I was starting to think about it. My original plan was to stay there 6 months to a year or longer than I was. And then I got some opportunities in LA, and I came out here for that.
Interesting. Can you tell me what opportunities you got, or is that verboten?
I became president of the United States of America.
Oh my God. Who am I talking to right now? This is amazing. Are you Barack Obama? Man, you look so different with a mustache.
Right. Yeah. You would not believe how much the mustache changes things.
It's so
Did you know that
crazy.
he's from Chicago? Because that's me. Yeah. He went from Chicago to Washington. That was me. He got some opportunities and he left Chicago. That was, that's me.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Wouldn't that be funny if like he was your pal? Like he's like a guy who calls you occasionally and he's all like, Ian, guess what? Dude, I'm president. There's somebody he called.
It's totally possible that he would get a wrong number, and like there's no way that you would believe that that's what happened. If somebody's like, if he was, I'm not going to do a Barack Obama impression.
No, don't.
But if he was just like, hello, and you'd be like, wait, what? Is this like a Barack Obama impersonator? But I'm sorry, I have the wrong number. And they'd hang up, and you'd think that somebody was playing a very dumb trick on you, but really you just spoke to Barack Obama. That would be wild.
He's just a regular guy now.
It's had to have happened at least once.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's like, all the regular shoppers of Hobby Lobby in Dallas see George Bush there all the time now. They're like, W's got to buy his paint somewhere, right? So he's swinging in, he's checking it out, and they're like, is that? Nah, it's not him, but it totally is. Totally is. Oh, man, wild. That's funny. So you are president of the United States. You decide to go to Los Angeles. You are going to kill it while you're out there. What happens first? You move to LA to do some writing or to do some stand-up or all the above?
Yeah, just to kind of see what would happen out here. And I knew eventually you got to move to New York or LA, and I got pulled to LA. So that's where I went, and I enjoyed it quite a bit, and just was, starting to write things and trying to produce things and trying to come up with big, crazy ideas out here as opposed to Chicago.
And you were doing mostly stage shows, like theater and, well, not theater like straight theater, playwright style, but like you were doing stand-up and you were doing events or shows and stuff in like improv theaters in LA? Or what were you producing?
I like to produce weird high concept shows, and then I also was doing stand-up, and that led to getting to go out on the road a little bit, and getting to act a little bit and write on things, just a little bit of everything.
Yeah, right on.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about how you got connected with the show 7 Minutes in Purgatory.
How I got connected with it?
Yeah, like how'd you get that gig? How'd that go? Oh, you created it, and then
yeah.
Okay, tell me about it.
Yeah, I created that in Chicago.
Awesome.
A friend of mine that I produced a lot of things with over the years named Matt Byrne. And I had this kind of idea where I was like, it's kind of weird how comedians, it's a conversation between one person and a large group. And that's just kind of weird. We're like, it's one person speaking, and then as a group, the other side is communicating how they're feeling. If they laugh, then it's like, that means something good. If they don't laugh, that's also communicating something. And then so many variations in between. And that was just kind of a weird dynamic that I was thinking about. So when we were sitting down to think about shows, we figured out that a fun way to play with that would be to have a comedian perform to a camera in one room, and then the audience is in a separate room watching the comedian perform, and the comedian has no idea how they're doing. They could be killing, they could be bombing. They have no idea what's happening though. So it's like it really turns into a one-sided conversation. And the person that's used to being very much like the orchestrator of that, what kind of happens when it's in some ways you could say it's an even playing ground. In other ways you could say it's a reverse dynamic, but it's definitely going to switch things up. So we started producing the show in Chicago, and it was very fun to do. And we started producing in LA when I got out here, and we're able to do a couple seasons with Comedy Central's digital department, and it was all a big, crazy, fun whirlwind.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that the kind of high concept shows you're talking about when you're producing that kind of stuff, or is this more regular and some of the other high concept stuff is wilder?
That's an example of one of the high concept stuff. Before I left, I had a wedding. I married my career, and I did like a funeral. I did a court case. A few days before Trump was inaugurated, I did the inauguration of Mayor McCheese. I just like doing fun events, hopefully.
Yeah, that's great. And that's awesome too that 7 Minutes in Purgatory was your brainchild, that you moved from city to city and then onto the internet as well, so that people like me can see it. That's pretty great. May I ask a sort of a show businessy kind of question? How do you get from the LA based like stage show of this, or whatever way that you have to accomplish it because you need a lot of rooms? How did you get to the YouTube the Comedy Central online
They'll let you upload anything to YouTube. Are you kidding me? You can film anything and just upload it right here, right now. You want to get a show on YouTube? Film yourself. I'm telling you, in 2 minutes, I could have a 30-second show on YouTube. I could film myself having this conversation in YouTube. I'm not wearing a shirt. I'm going to film myself and upload it as we're speaking, and this will be the podcast
example of how to do
before we're
it.
done. This is going to be this is the Yes But Why show. I'm talking to Amy Jordan, and this is going to go up on YouTube, my very own show.
I misspoke. I meant Comedy
seconds.
Central digital series.
Well, there's definitely no way I knew what you meant, and so I had to make sure that you knew that you could upload whatever you wanted to YouTube. Now, you and all of your listeners know that.
Yeah. I mean, we thought that there was some sort of network executive in between us and a YouTube show. Now we know.
It's true.
There isn't.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sending you an unlisted link of the Yes
This is
But
the only
Why
links I
show.
like. Unlisted link.
And you're welcome to do whatever you want with it.
Well. Unlisted link.
It's 10 seconds.
Frightening. I feel good about it. I'll put it in the episode. It'll be great.
Great. Perfect. I will leave that up.
So Your bio indicates that you were one of the new faces at Just for Laughs. Was that in 2015? Tell me about that. Oh, excuse me. Hello, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Sorry. Did you hear the big jingle?
No, the jingle.
Great. Never mind. There was a big sound that my computer made that was apparently only in my head. So, moving on. You were in, your bio says that you were one of the new faces for the Just for Laughs festival. And what I've heard of this particular thing is that it's a real good spot to be in, and that it's an important point in one's career to become a new face. What was the experience for you, and like how did you like the festival, and did you feel like it was a very important thing?
Here's what's funny. It is absolutely a big step for a comedian to get to do that. It's like a good thing. And when you have not done it, what everybody tells you that has done it is, it's really not a big deal. It's really like it's like cool. It's fun. It's like it means a lot, but it's not the thing that changes your life. And that can be frustrating if you haven't done it, because it's like, oh, sure, this person that's done it wants to say that to me, but I want to do it. And then you do it, and a few months go by and you reflect on it, and you're like, it's fun. It doesn't like change your life. It's like a cool thing that some really great opportunities come out of, but it's not the end-all be-all of it. And then if you say that to somebody that hasn't done it, you're very aware of the fact that you're just one more person that is doing the thing that annoyed you.
Yeah. But it does get people, it's a room that has a lot of good potential connections, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't mean to disparage it at all.
No, I totally understand. Your story makes absolute sense. And from every point of view, it's important to remember that. Totally.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very grateful that I got to do it. And it was, it let me meet a lot of really wonderful people. And there is just kind of like a badge of honor of like, oh, this person, is a new face. Let's see what they're like. So yeah, I mean, but there's also a lot of stress that comes with that. It's like it's a very, it's a total roller coaster. It's fun and weird and crazy.
Yeah, it's cool. You're in Canada, so you're safe, right? So things are good. There's other comedians around, but then you don't know what kind of weird things are going to happen, or if there's going to be pranks, or somebody brought a puppet. It's, you never know. You never know how that's going to go.
It's true.
Yeah,
it's true.
So when you are writing, how do you build your material from just a kernel of an idea, or do you try little bits? I watched a few of your sets online, and they seem very well orchestrated. Like they're very well put together. So I wonder, do you write it all down first and then, you work on it, or do you try stuff out at open mics and then put the jokes together after that?
Every month, once a month, I never know when it's going to happen. I could be driving, I could be taking a walk, but I pass out, and 2 days later I wake up and there's notes scribbled all across my body, and they have ideas. And the problem is that my handwriting is completely ineligible. It is ineligible. It is not allowed to be used on the stage. That was not me misspeaking in the middle of this rant. My writing is ineligible. I'm not allowed to use any of those ideas. So anything that I see in my body, it's not allowed to be used on stage. So then, out of frustration of all these fun ideas that I have now written on my body, I have to sit down and write different ideas. the way that I'll mostly come up with things is I'll have a fun, weird piece of something that is not fully fleshed at all, but it's like, what if I wanted to do something with balloon animals, Okay. You'd like try to just kick around some ideas with balloon animals. And then I'll be thinking about something else entirely, and I'll think of another thing that I want to do. And I'll say, oh, wait a second, what if I combined these two pieces, like they're Legos or something? And then slowly but surely it evolves into, oh, this is what this could look like on stage.
Yeah. So it comes.
And then the next month I pass
writing.
out again, and I'm covered in writing, and it all starts over again.
Is that what the television show Blind Spot is about?
You'd have to ask the creator of that show. I created 7 Minutes in Purgatory, which is not related to this.
In Blind Spot, a girl wakes up and her body's covered in magical tattoos that give her information. I'm not.
Is
joking.
that
That's
connected to the movie Blind Spotting that just came out?
No, they're different things.
Yeah, there's a movie coming out called Blind Spotting.
Yeah, no, I know. I've seen the trailers and listened to the interviews with the gentleman who made it. So, though he doesn't tell you what blind spotting means.
Train spotting. What?
He doesn't tell you what the phrase blind spotting refers to. Do you know what it refers to?
Blind spotting, yes. Blind spotting, the definition of blind spotting is a word that you don't know the definition of. So if he told you, it would have ruined it. That's blind spotting.
I see.
Yeah.
I have a hearing problem, and it's called mondegreen. The hearing problem is that when I mishear stuff, instead of just mishearing it and being able to say, hey, what is it that you said? My brain reworks what the words are. So I think you said, my purple dinosaur went to the garage. And I go, I'm sorry? And you're like, I just told you to hand me that pen. I'm like, cool.
Wow.
So I do that, so I looked it up, and it's called mondegreen, and the reason why it's called mondegreen is because the actual scientific name sounds kind of like mondegreen, and so they named it mondegreen because everyone who heard the scientific name was like, what? You said mondegreen? So that's what it is.
That's funny.
That's
I like that a lot.
It's an actual fact.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
So listeners at home, make sure to go home and Google mondeline. All right, that is the name of this thing. If you Google it, then you'll be able to learn more about that.
You should Google all of the things that we've talked about this evening. It's very important for you to Google it.
The key to being a successful comedian is, 1, listen to a lot of podcasts, and 2, Google everything they're talking about.
Yep, throughout.
If there's one thing I've learned, it's that.
And to be an extra good participant, it's you should send them messages in comments to let them know if one of the things they're talking about is incorrect in any way. So definitely tell them that.
That is
it's important.
Key. Yes. Do you think that Jerry Seinfeld did whatever it is that he did without correcting people on podcasts getting coffee? No, he did not. So that's the key to success.
You should follow Jerry Seinfeld. He is the one that you should be trying to emulate, because what happened to him will certainly happen now.
Yep.
So right now you are headed to, you'll be coming to Austin soon for the Out of Bounds Festival. Do you do a lot of traveling from festivals to festivals? I know you did. We were just talking about Just for Laughs. But do you do lots of different festivals all around?
Yeah, and I love Austin. Austin is such a great town. I'll tell you this, anybody that, if this comes out before the festival, anybody that wants to go to the Museum of the Weird with me in Austin, we will set a time when I'm there and we can all go. Anybody that wants to is invited. Just hit me up, because the last time I went, I was completely alone, and I paid extra to get the special tour, and a man put a nail up his nose for just me. for just me, alone in a room with a man putting a nail up his nose. So anybody that wants to go to the Museum of the Weird with me is more than welcome. Please, let's together watch a man put a nail up his nose.
I wish that whomever takes you up on this brings a camera so that they can just film you alone in a room with a man putting a nail up his nose. I imagine them shutting the door
people
like
take
right
me up
before.
on that.
I hope so too. I'll put it all over the
if you're listening to this and you're wondering how serious is he, you need to know I am 100% serious.
When are you going to go? During the weekend? Because if you want to meet Ian, you can meet him Friday night, the 31st of August at the Velveeta Room, where he'll be performing.
That's right.
And is that your first Out of Bounds show? I wrote down a few, but you seem to be doing a lot of stuff, which is exciting. Is that your first show at the festival?
I'm very excited about it. I'll be honest, I don't remember specific. I'm terrible with times and dates and stuff.
It's okay.
But I don't remember if that is my first at that festival. But I do know that the Velveeta Room is right around the corner from the Museum of the Weird. So let's go to both. Okay, we'll go from one to the other. We'll spend the day together. Me on stage, you at the Museum of the Weird. Let's do it.
It's going to be really funny if there's like 5 or 6 people that like take you up on that. That would be really fun.
You have no idea how I would love that so much. You would make my day, okay? You want to keep Austin weird? Go to the museum of it with me.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Right.
It's important. You need to go do these things. You need to take advantage. Live in your town like you're a tourist. You shouldn't just be like, I don't know. There's lots of places in Austin that are touristy that I've never gone to. I've lived here for 10 years, and people are like, what? You never been to this place? I'm like, oh, yeah. I just figured I wasn't supposed to go. They'd be like, local, get out of here. So what for you is the next goal? Like, what are you working on right now? And it doesn't have to be like I'm trying to get a television show or whatever. Like, is there an idea or something that's sort of been in your head recently? Like, what are you working on right now?
Yes. So here's what's weird about this. I'm going to tell you what it is. It's going to sound like I'm making it up, and I won't be able to answer too many follow-up questions, but I'm being real. Okay. The next thing that I'm working on is that I'm remaking The Godfather. That's what I'm doing. I can't wait for you to see it, but I'm going to remake the movie The Godfather.
Excellent. I will ask no follow-up questions. That is as exciting as possible. It has been a pleasure to chat with you. I'll be doing an official
Q&A at the Museum of the Weird. Why am I promoting? I have shows that you need to come out to, and I'm just trying to get people to hang out with me at a museum. Come see all of the shows, and also to the Museum of the Weird. I'm very excited about this festival. It is going to be great. So I hope to see you all there. Thank you for interviewing me. At this point,
if I don't get them as a sponsor, I don't know what. I mean. Called them out like 7 times. People are gonna go to the museum. It's very important. Oh my god!
And if they go without me, I'm gonna be upset.
Well, no one should go without you. It should be one weekend a year, just Labor Day weekend during Out of Bounds. You can go with Ian, and the museum closes for the rest of the year. That is the only time. It's a big group with you. They have your back. They're like, "Great job, Ian. See that guy with the nail?" And you're like, I love it. And they're like, we love that you love it. Oh, you've been delightful. I really appreciate you sharing everything with me and chatting about your, writing stuff and how you got started. I really think that the people who come to see you will be excited to know a little bit more about you, and go to all of Ian's shows at Out of Bounds. I will have all the links up on the website. I will be putting them all over Twitter so that you guys can check it out. Thank you guys so much for listening, and thank you, Ian, for being with us.
Thank you so much. I will talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk to me.
Thank you very much. Very excited to be on here with you.
Awesome. Wonderful. So excited. First thing I wanted to chat with you about is I'm originally from Boston, and it looks like you went to Boston College and are a seminal member of Improv Boston. Tell me everything.
Yes. I moved to Boston when I was, I just turned 18. So I moved to Boston to go to Boston College. I drove from Chicago, which is where I grew up. I got in my car and drove to go to BC. And I look back on that and I'm like, what was I doing at the age of 18 driving halfway across the country? But I wanted to take my car out there with me, and have it with me at college. And then I was in Boston for 22 years, which was not expected. I always pictured myself going to school for 4 years and then going on to the next big adventure. And I ended up getting stuck in Boston for 22 years, and I loved every minute of it.
Oh, yeah? Tell me about it. And the audience knows that even though I grew up in Boston, I have a bit of a salty realization. Me and Boston don't go well together anymore. But tell me about your love of it. 22 years, that's a long time. That's longer, honestly, I guess, than I lived there.
Yeah, and that's longer than my hometown. And I think I still love Chicago more than any other place. Whenever I go back to Chicago, it's home. But when I go to Boston, Boston is where I made my career. It's where I became an improviser. It's where I became a professional. I would say like 90% of my friends are still in Boston, and I totally get it. Like I get that feeling. It took me about. You described it as saltiness towards Boston. It took me about 5 years for it to finally make sense to me. And those first 5 years were not easy. Being a Midwestern kid, moving there, I just couldn't get the East Coast thing at all. I couldn't get the cowpath type streets that went everywhere and made no sense. I couldn't get the attitude. Like there was this East Coast attitude I couldn't get used to. And then about 5 years in, I always tell people that it was like the Matrix, like that moment in the Matrix when Neo sees everything. I remember that. I was just suddenly like, oh, okay, I get it. And I get what I need to do to kind of survive here. And then it started to get, and then it got a lot more fun. But I'll say this, the one thing that I loved about Boston more than anything, and I have not been able to find this anywhere else in the country, and this has nothing to really do with Boston itself, but I think New England as a part of the country is very magical. I could get lost in all 6 of those states for months.
Yeah, absolutely. In the backwoods of, Vermont and New Hampshire, I love those spots. I love that kind of stuff. Spent a lot of time in the Berkshires doing summer stock myself. So I like the the beautiful trees and all that kind of stuff for sure. But I think it's like people are either, like you say, you love Chicago because it's always home. I feel like where you grow up, you either hold it warmly in your heart or you reject it heavily and you move forward with whatever it is in your life. Like, because I know a lot of people from all sorts of places and they're like, nah, forget that place. Screw Nebraska or whatever. And it's just because they themselves, and I think I'm old enough at this point to realize that it's kind of like, I just needed to be on my own. So I was like, how far can I get? Oh, Texas? Cool. Doing it. And my mom was like, okay, I guess so. But when you're in high school and they're like, but why don't you want to go to college in Boston? There's so many colleges in Boston. And you're like, nope, not interested. Not interested at all.
Right.
I saw that you studied physics at BC. So you didn't get into theater straight away, or you got a degree in something logical and did theater on the side?
So I was always, ever since I could remember, I was into the sciences. I remember as a 5-year-old kid, like waking up just to look at things under my microscope or like looking at things in my telescope. And so science kind of was always my thing. And that followed me through all my grades. And then when I was like, oh wait, I get to choose to just study this one thing. I took it. However, I did get the theater bug my senior year in high school. I they needed a bunch of people for a production of The Wiz, and The Wiz uses a lot of people, so they pretty much cast anyone. And so I auditioned, I got in, and I was like, this is really cool. This is awesome. And I pursued it as I went into college, but the only problem was I only really had one show under my belt when I got to BC. So auditioning for shows was not that easy with such limited experience. Then I was lucky enough, I'll never forget the spring of 1993. I was walking around campus and I see a flyer for auditions, and the auditions just say no experience necessary. They didn't even say anything about improv. They didn't have anything like that. It just said no experience necessary, auditions in this dorm from 7 to 10 p.m. And I remember I was just like a block away from the dorm, and I went, I auditioned, and then that's where my improv career began.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So it was like a BC improv group trying to get new members?
Basically, yeah. And they did improvised murder mysteries. And so it was great. It was like, I would say like partially scripted improvised murder mysteries. So they would give you an outline, and they didn't really understand improv as a art or as a concept. They had a few warm-ups that they borrowed from the other improv teams. But other than that, they basically just said, okay, here's a script, and then in between the scenes, when you're mingling in the audience, this is what you need to improvise. And so that really got that piqued my interest, and I wanted to do. I did the one show with them, and I not only I think that of all of the things that were involved in that show, it was the improv aspect of it that really jumped out at me. And so yeah, I know. And so I just I did it for all 4.5 of my years. I needed to stay an extra semester to finish up a couple classes, and during that time, I went all through the ranks, vice president, president, director. But the thing is that because they didn't really know what was, and this is again early 90s, they didn't really know what it was that they were biting into. I kind of ended up doing a lot of the research on my own, and by research I mean actual like library books. Right, like going to the library, looking up improv, and then at some point halfway through my college career, the internet, and so I was actually able to Google, not even Google, sorry, I was able to like Alta Vista and Lycos and all those other search engines, and start to find things online, and just to kind of feed that hunger. And so by the time I got out of BC, which was 97. I started to look around even more, and that's how I found Improv Boston.
Okay, so when you got out, Improv Boston was already doing a thing, and you went in there and you were like, so tell me about the murder mystery. And they were like, no, that's not what we do here.
That's basically it. That's a really good way to, that was basically what happened. Is like, I have no idea what I'm getting myself into. I took a class, and then my instructor at the time, her name was Marjorie Burren, and she was like, hey, I think you should audition for the main group. And I did, and I got in, and that was when was that? Fall of 97, October 97. Now the thing is, like, I was still, like I told you before, I was doing like early internet research on what improv was, and by that point I had already sort of found out about stuff in Chicago and New York. And so I wanted to bring that stuff to Boston, but it wasn't that easy. I mean, they were happy with their short form shows, but I was like, I want to be able to do more. And so I did my best to leave the city and leave Boston whenever I could to research other forums and to kind of study with other people. And so from like 2000, I was out in New York every few months studying, and that's how I met like early UCB. I tell people this story of like I hired Amy Poehler to come teach a workshop in Boston for $200, a bus ticket, and a meal at a Thai restaurant.
That sounds like a good deal. I'd take that deal.
and so, I mean, that's how like where that scene was at the time. But I got it. And then like I ended up getting 3 of the original UCB4, because by the time it was time to get the 4th one, they were already kind of they were going full speed ahead. But I was able to get enough of those instructors into Boston to then really start to kick the long form scene into gear. And then right around that time is when they decided to hire me as the artistic director of Improv Boston, and that was in the year 2000.
Yeah, I mean, well, you're really spearheading this whole thing. I mean, did you get in there and they're like, yeah, we're just doing our own thing? And you're like, but how about we get other people in to teach us? Did you spearhead that as far as like making Improv Boston have more educational experiences, like, or was that happening and you just also were like, okay, hey guys, I'm real brave, so I'm going to go ask these strangers. How was the educational scene when you got there, and how did you change it? Sounds like you just were like, I'm making sure this is the best theater around, so I'm getting all the teachers that can come visit to help us out. But what were the people that taught you, and how did that start for you?
That's a great question. Yeah, I am the one who did that. I am the one who was like sort of getting all these new influences into the theater. And to be honest, I think I was kind of a pain in the ass because I ended up leaving Improv Boston because it was not really embraced by the organization. They saw me doing all this extra work, and so much so that they kind of gave me my own side night. They were like, here, they didn't have Thursday shows at the time, so they were like, here, have Thursdays to kind of do this long form stuff that nobody wants to come see. Why don't you do that on Thursdays, but leave the Friday, Saturday stuff to the professionals, right? And eventually I ended up, and a little part of the whole Luera story that not a lot of people know, and sorry for talking about myself in the third person, but a lot of people don't know that I ended up leaving Improv Boston because of that disagreement, and I left them for a year, and that was in '99, and that was just to kind of pursue my own long form stuff. I ended up renting a totally different theater. I rented them out for a year because they didn't have any program. They were kind of all over the place, so they didn't have any program. So they're like, sure, improv guy, you pay the rent while we figure our stuff out. And so while they figured their stuff out, I started to try all this different long form stuff. I started to bring in more instructors, and suddenly this third theater is starting to steal talent and starting to steal audiences. And then after about a year, so then now we go from 99 to 2000, then that's when they decided to hire me back, not as a performer, but as the artistic director.
Oh man, it's crazy to think about. You're from Chicago, and like at least in my mind, Chicago would seem to be the birthplace of improv. Yet you didn't even come in contact with it until you got to Boston. Essentially, I would say, Boston should thank you clearly for bringing it there. But how do you think did you go back to Chicago and get some information from them? And were you like, oh, turns out they're doing a bunch of stuff I'd be interested in? Like, you spent so much time in Boston developing stuff. Did you ever go back and meet people in Chicago and consider going back there because it was such an improv mecca, or is it blown up in my head, because that's what they tell me?
No, you got it right. I always tell people, and they always ask me, is Chicago, because I'm from Chicago, is that where I got my interest in improv came from? And I always tell people, I correct them subtle. I do a slight correction in that I tell them I grew up on the south side of Chicago. Now, the south side of Chicago, I think, felt the north side where all of the improv is. Felt like a world away. Like I think back as a kid, and I think back at where Second City and IO and all those theaters are, or were, I should say. Like I think about where they are in relation to where I grew up, and it's a world away. The north side is something completely different from the south side. And so there was no improv in the south side. In fact, one of my professional goals has been over time to bring more improv to the south side, and it's amazing that now the neighborhood I grew up in now has improv nights and comedy nights, which is very exciting. I'm very happy about that. And just a few years ago, I did actually a couple of improv festivals on the south side and all of that. Even when I was living in Boston, I was going back to Chicago to do that. So to see it now becoming part of the fabric of the South Side is very exciting. But I did go back. I was going home often during college. Going back to the college years. During college, I was going back during the summers, and I would go back visit my family often. And during all those times, I would immerse myself in the improv scene. When I was going back home during college, like once I knew that improv was something I loved, I would immerse myself in classes. And I was taking classes at Second City and at Annoyance and IO, and I was taking all that back with me back home. And back then it was I was only taking really intro classes, so I wasn't getting like the full-on Herald exposure or anything like that. But I was taking enough improv classes to come back with some tools to be able to better communicate the craft. And then once I started my own theater in Boston, and once I started to get into improv Boston, I would take these sabbaticals in Chicago and really immerse myself even more. And I would say some of the biggest and most influential, the second chapter of the influential training I got came out of Chicago. And that's when I got, I did about 4 to 5 months at IO. I did a lot of work with a lot of classes with Mick Napier at Annoyance, and got into a bunch of intensives at Second City, and then brought all of that back with me to Boston.
Man, I love that phrase, sabbatical.
Yeah.
That's so real. It's such a fun way of thinking of like going and spending 5 months doing improv. I'm like, that sounds like so much fun. No, it's my business, so it's a sabbatical. I was like, ooh, I love it. So you clearly have like community building in your bones. I mean, you aren't just so many people that I know in the industry of, I'm going to say show business, but it's like a humongous term of whatever that means. But generally, people aren't trying to learn things so they can share them with other people. But that seems to be your impetus. You love going and learning things so that you can share it with other people. Have you always been that way? And how have you used that to develop the communities, both at Improv Boston and the myriad of other places that you are currently artistic director on your wonderful bio?
Yeah, I don't know where exactly it came from, but I do know that it's always been there. When I was younger in like high school and college, I used to wonder, I'm like, why am I the only one running for these leadership positions in these clubs? Like, don't we all want to do this? Don't we all want to be leaders in the clubs that we belong to? Right. And then once I would get a leadership position, I really enjoyed getting people to work together. Like, even before I really knew how improv spoke to that, I always enjoyed getting different. I guess it's almost like the peacemaker part of me just enjoys getting different people of different backgrounds and different perspectives working together. And so I did that in Boston, and I'm doing it again here in Sarasota. The community I'm working with now, I almost feel like I'm about to enter my 4th year here, or finish my 4th year, and I feel like I'm doing it again. The same thing I did in Boston. It's like we started out, I came into a small community that's grown about 300% in the last 3 years, and so I can't really say where. I don't know where it came from or why it's there, but I do enjoy putting communities together, building communities, make people better, and also teaching.
Yeah, magic. You have such magic. I mean, like, even just the idea that you've been in Sarasota for 4 years and it's blown up so much. Like, that's so great. How did you get to Sarasota?
So I had been coming to back when I was still with Improv Boston, I would be coming to the Sarasota Improv Festival. The first one was in 2000.
Oh, yeah.
Like 2009 was the first one, and I would come down. I came down that year, and then I loved it so much. It's one of the most unique festivals I'd ever been to, and I could speak about that in a little bit. But it was so unique, and I came back every year, and about year 6 or so, I was given a heads up. They told me, "Hey, listen, we're about to open up a new full-time position, and if you want to apply to it, please do." And I did, and now I'm here. And it's one of the few as we all know, there aren't that many full-time improv positions out there, and this is one of the few, and that's what my title at the theater is director of improvisation, and it's a big theater with 5 stages, but one stage is committed to the improv troupe, and that's the one that I run.
Yeah. Well, I mean, very few people have the magic you have. People don't both want to perform and do stuff on stage and also do the, bureaucratic talking to people, making it happen, getting them involved, dealing with the rejection of them, not coming back after a level 1. There's not a lot of people that are into that kind of stuff. So, when there's a full-time job available, I'm glad you took it as opposed to somebody else who was like, hey man, I'm just going to work here until I get hired on SNL. Like,
right. Yeah.
I call them. Oh man. Yeah. That's so super wonderful. So you were, you set aside a story. Tell me the story. Why do you love the Sarasota Improv Festival so much?
Oh, right. Yeah. So so ever since the first one that I came to in 2009, I remember by that point I had a couple dozen festivals under my belt. So I kind of knew what to expect. But when I came here, it was different in that I wasn't performing to other improvisers. I was performing to an actual public audience, that was one of the first times I'd gone to a festival that wasn't full of improvisers in the audience. Nice. These were like real audience members, and they loved it. And we were doing some stuff. We were doing something called Freeform, which is what I developed in Boston, and which we're going to be doing in Austin at the Out of Bounds Festival. I developed Freeform, and I was like, I don't know if this is – I know that Sarasota's big into short form, so I don't know if they're going to dig this Freeform stuff, but let's give it a try. And they did. They loved it, and not only did they love it, they completely followed it. And so – at that point, I was hooked. I'm like, okay, this is a very theater savvy audience. They love their improv, and all the artistic stuff aside, it's a beach town, and it's a small. And when I say town, it's a lot smaller than Boston or Chicago. We only have 60,000 people. We have 100,000 at peak during the winter, but yet. The community loves the arts so much that they're able to support several equity level theaters full time around the year, and thankfully within all of that is also my improv theater, which runs all year round.
Huh. Fascinating. When I found out when I was looking at your information, saw you're in Sarasota, my mother is one of those wintertime residents.
Oh, really?
Well, she lives in Longboat Key, but she spends a lot of time in Sarasota, and she's always telling me about the theater. She's like, oh, well, me and the girls went to see this play, and they're so lovely. You've got to come down here and see it. So, she and her friends, all of her retired lady friends, are living in condos, by the beach, and then coming out to see stuff. So I hope they're seeing your shows and supporting you. I'll certainly send her your way. She's got a pack of about 15 ladies, I think, and they run deep. They're always hanging out doing stuff. So it should be, she's one of those winter residents. So I was like, ooh, yep. Fun. Sarasota, so close.
Yeah.
Tell me about the freeform format. I had read up a little bit on you had worked on another format called the sitcom format. Did you invent both of these?
The sitcom is one that I learned going back to that late 90s era, right before when I was telling you that I was hiring a bunch of people to kind of teach me. One of those people taught me the sitcom, and I'll never forget like that early sort of I think I even might have used Yahoo as my search engine, but I remember finding just like looking for everything improv, came across this guy who was describing this sitcom format, and he was out of Chicago. His name was Dan Goldstein, and I just emailed him, and he was like, hey, Will, thanks for reaching out. I would love to work on the sitcom with you. In fact, I'll be back in Boston this was like in 1997 that I emailed him, and he was like, I'll be in Boston in a year to do a residency at Harvard. Let's connect then. Ooh. And I was like, okay, sure. And this was like before social network. Yeah. And this was like before social networking or anything like that. So then I completely forgot about this guy. And then a year later, I get an email being like, hey, not sure if you still work here. 'Cause this was back before anyone had personal email addresses. You just had your work email address and that's it. So luckily I still worked at that company because he dropped me an email and he's like, hey, I'm in Boston. Do you remember me? And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. So anyway, he taught me the sitcom. And it's basically a very stylized herald that then became our long form staple in Boston while we were trying to figure stuff out. And I still teach it to this day. It's he kind of gave me as a thank you to me for all the work I was doing in Boston, he kind of gave me eternal rights to the format. So I'm the only person actively teaching it right now. But in that whole era of once again, I go back to the early 90s and this is like the early 2000s. I had this real privilege of, I mentioned the UCB, 3 of the UCB 4. I mentioned Mick and IO, but I was also exposed to I took 2 week-long intensives with Keith Johnstone. I was taking, I was learning this sitcom format. What I ended up doing was just immersing myself in so many different philosophies that I ended up asking myself, why are all of these schools of thought separate? Why aren't they all mixed into something unique? And this is kind of like my physics brain kicking in, basically saying, why can't short forms speak to long forms, speak to Johnstonian improv, right? Speak to annoyance improv? Why is it all separate? And out of all of that curiosity started to evolve this thing called freeform. And freeform is basically an exploration of all of those different styles of improv into one. And for a long time, that's all freeform was. Like I basically would have to teach it as, I would have to do a snapshot of all these other philosophies. But now it's kind of evolved to its own thing. It's got its own language. It's got its own style that when people see it, they're like, that is freeform. That is, that is Big Bang style freeform, et cetera. And one thing that also started to happen was that once I started to get into international touring, then those schools of thought, these schools of thought that have no reason to connect into the U.S. Education base of improv, I started to embrace all of those as well, and they started to get absorbed into what is a free form.
Yeah. Well, freeform sounds like an amalgamation of all the education that you have. So
it is exactly
a building of everything, all the exploration you did, born into a little tiny box called the freeform format.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Wow. I can't even imagine you doing the snapshot of it being all like, okay, here's a quick explanation of these 10 different ways of looking at stuff. Some people say this, some people say that. Yeah.
Exactly. And I remember doing that for the longest time when I was teaching it. And then I'm like, in order for freeform to become its own thing, I need to stop doing that. I need to stop trying to get people to understand, to learn all of these other philosophies. And so that's kind of where we're at now.
The people that want to know will come to you and they'll want to know. You know what I mean? Like, there are some people who are like, great, I'm good. I get it. Yes, and cool. And you're like, okay, great. Super glad you get that one concept. But, some people that want to go into it deeper, or sometimes I personally find that different styles help with different kinds of stories, or they've helped me at different times in my life. As a teacher, I've also found that people's brains work differently, right? So I will spend, when I'm teaching, my favorite is to teach. I don't even know what format I'm teaching, to be honest with you, because the group that I initially learned from was referred to as Chicago style, which means very little. And it's mostly like basic Del Closian, I know that's not real, sort of long form. You know, it's very basic. No Herald. We didn't do Herald, and we didn't take suggestions. So it was an unusual sort of situation. So when I learned it, it had those trappings. But after that, you know, I went in and researched and found different ways that people were teaching. And since I was able to teach with a wider berth. Like, it wasn't like, just stick with what Keith Johnstone says or just stick with this. I kind of was able to listen to my students and figure out how to communicate to them what they needed for them to accomplish the task. I was like, okay, I need them to do blank. How do they work? Well, looks like I got some visual learners. Looks like I got a couple of people who just are not interested in acting, but they certainly understand comedy concepts. Okay, we'll talk about it that way. You know, so for me, that's how I've always taught my 101s, and also how I teach corporate workshops. I have like 3 corporate workshop possibilities in my pocket, and then I talk to them for 10 minutes and pick which one.
Yeah, that's smart, and that's great, and you're absolutely right on all of that. Yeah, and I find myself doing sort of taking a similar strategy. Like, once I get a read of the room or the read of the student, taking the right tool out of the box and being like, okay, this would probably work best for you, right?
Yeah.
These exercises that are high on physicality that came out of this school of thought would be really good for you.
Yeah, they'll get you to the point where I need you to say the right thing, or not say the right thing exactly, but, you know, say something at the right moment, you know, sort of work the physical part of your brain so that it just comes out.
Exactly.
Fascinating. I love it. You make me so excited for education. How wonderful that you're coming to Out of Bounds to teach workshops. You're so inspiring.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, I'm very excited. I'm very excited.
I really appreciate that. Have you ever been, have you come to Austin before?
I have been there. Yeah, I did one Out of Bounds before where I taught a workshop, and I think that was a few years, 5-6 years ago. And I'd been there one other time as well, where I was just passing through, and the folks at the Hideout invited me to be in the Maestro.
Uh-huh. Yeah, the Hideout is the friendliest of all the improv theaters. Not that any improv theater in Austin is unfriendly, but certainly the Hideout is the most friendly.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely like to let some guy who was just passing through town, you know, just jump up on stage. You know, that was really nice of them. Yeah. And I had already known some of them, and over time I've gotten even closer to, especially the folks from PGRAPH are folks that I've gotten closer to over the last few years. And PGRAPH has come to the Sarasota Improv Festival. In fact, the last, I believe, 3 years they've been here now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they were just talking about that. So great. Yeah, they're major staples of the city for sure. So I'm looking at your offerings, your workshop offerings, and I noticed that one is in Spanish. Are you going to teach the whole workshop in Spanish? Is it for our Spanish-speaking improvisers?
That is the goal. Yep. I'll be teaching in Spanish to all of our Spanish speaking audience or the Spanish speaking community. So it is something that I do often when I go to Latin America, when I go to Spain, I will teach and perform in Spanish.
That's awesome. Have you been speaking Spanish since you were a child, or did you like learn it? Did you like pick it up and then were like, it's cool, I can also teach improv?
I was lucky enough to grow up in a bilingual household, and so and I say that more like I would go to school and play with my friends in English, but when I was home, it was all Spanish, and so I never formally learned it as much as I just picked it up as a kid. And also I think it helped that every summer my parents would send me to visit my grandmother in Mexico, and I would spend weeks. And so that kind of immersion teaches you very quickly.
That's fun. Every summer when you were in elementary school and stuff, or all the way through?
All the way up to like when I was 15.
Awesome. I bet you were kind of like, oh man, every summer I got to go do this. But like looking back on that, it's like, ooh, what a great opportunity.
I know. And like, I wish I could do the same for my kids. And we've been talking about it. Like, well, they have grandparents in Mexico. They have grandparents. My wife is from Brazil, so they have grandparents in Brazil. So it might be a good opportunity for them.
Sure, why not? Check it out. See the world. Yeah, I mean, even just to meet kids somewhere else. I taught a kids comedy camp this summer, and it was teens. It was like 14 through 16, and it was a sketch comedy camp where I taught them how to write, and they did their show. And it's at a theater here, just north of Austin at Georgetown Palace Theater. And most of it has a very big, vibrant, like child actor community up there. And so there's kids that have been taking the camps for years and years. But there were also in my camp this summer, 2 girls that were not even from Texas. One was from Massachusetts and one was from New Jersey. And it was just like, what are you doing here? And they're like, my mom sent me to spend the summer with my grandmother. And my grandmother was like, here, go to this camp. And I was like, that's both hilarious. And I'm so glad you're here. Like, what a fun thing. Like, number one, to be all like, oh, you coming to spend the summer with me? Go to camp. That's hilarious. But also the fact that it's like, what an opportunity for you. Like, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, we had in our teen camps over the summer, we had one young girl that was here from Norway. Wow. And yeah, I know. She was there with the rest of the teens. And so of course she was like just like an exhibit for everyone to kind of just ask questions to. And like, she was like this novelty. Everybody was like, tell me about Norway. What do you eat? How do you say this?
What do you eat?
It was really cute.
Like they're like, oh, well, there's a river and I just stick my hand in and a fish comes out and that's what I eat for lunch. Like, no, it's a regular place. Oh, that's funny. Yeah. In my middle school camp, I had one gal from Mexico and she very sweetly helped me work on my Spanish. I'm very terrible at it, but she was like, while I coached her in writing stuff and comedy, she helped me with my Spanish and we giggled to ourselves. She was a shy gal, but I guess, Mexico is more commonplace down here. So they weren't all over her to be like, what's your life like? Though when we finished the camp, I did go up to her mom to be like, how awesome of you to come up here and bring her to do this. Cause she is clearly an amazing writer and so good. And I'm so glad I got to work with her, but it's just so fun. Like these kids coming from all over to do this kind of stuff. I love the idea of that. And, I love providing both adults and kids with like a good experience. Like all I want is for them to have a good, for them to look back on it and be like, oh man, that was so great. I had a good time.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I mean, I was 16 once and I remember that, I remember my theater stuff. So I won't want to give them that same thing where, when they're 40, they can be like, oh, I remember when I went to that camp. Yeah. It's so fun. Good. So you have touched the lives of so many different people, from the people that you studied with in Chicago to your fellow students at BC, the community at Improv Boston that you developed and I'm sure is still benefiting, and the community in Sarasota. How does that feel? Do you think about the breadth of people that you've affected and what that means to you? Like, what does that mean to your life, do you think? It's a big, huge question. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I feel very lucky. And I think in many ways it is a testament to how improv has changed me as a person. In many ways it's kind of reprogrammed me, in the way that I think. I started out, I used to be, even though I enjoyed being in clubs and taking leadership positions and all that, I was still very shy. So one of the first ways that I think improv changed me was really be confident, and not only that, but accepting of who I am and who I was. And in fact, to this day, the first week of my six level curriculum, the very first week is called your authentic self, because I think that is really important for people to just kind of be aware of who they are. And if they are aware of who they are, be confident and accepting of who they are. Because I think before you even get into any other improv lessons, I want to make sure that you could tap into what you bring to the stage. And then the other way I think that improv has changed me is not only in that way, but also in adding the yes and element to the way I approach work and the way I approach life, in that when opportunities have come up, I have applied that to them and just said, okay, yeah, I'll do it. Now what happens next? The only reason, or I should say the reason why I do so much traveling is because, and I think it was like 2003, I got an email from a guy in Puerto Rico, and he just emailed me saying, hey, listen, I've been trying to contact groups all over the U.S. because I'm looking for a Spanish-speaking improv group to come down to Puerto Rico to be a part of this tournament. And he basically said, he's like, no one is responding. He's like, are you interested? And I was like, yes, I am. And then since then, that opportunity is what opened my eyes up to the fact that there is a global improv scene, that there were improv communities in Peru, in Chile, in Mexico, in Puerto Rico, in Spain, right? And then it made me even more curious. And because of that one yes, I've now been able to say yes to so many opportunities, and I've been able to perform and teach improv all over Latin America. I've gone to Japan, Korea, China, Hong Kong, Saudi Arabia, all over Europe. And that's just sort of applying yes and to life. And so and going back to the question of like touching all these communities, I feel very lucky. I feel very lucky that I've had these opportunities. I feel very lucky to have met all these people. But it all, in my opinion, goes back to what the way improv has changed me.
Yeah. Wow. So I have one more question for you.
Sure.
And it's kind of selfish because, the whole podcast is kind of about the ebb and flow of a creative life. And, some days you're into it and some days you're not. You seem like the kind of guy who's into it most of the time. But, there's ebbs and flows. Some days you're like, oh, God, could I have picked literally anything else to do? And some days
Sure.
You're like, yes, I am so lucky to be able to do this. I personally have been married for a few years and have a new baby. So I am starting that portion of my life. You are married and have kids. How do you navigate the family life and that sort of, those responsibilities with your improv life and performing and being out there and being part of the community? How do you balance those two things?
So I think the two things that I try to do effectively is one, I try to squeeze as much time out of any given day as possible. I mean, I'm up at 5:15 every morning, and I'm in bed, usually by 11:30, and so I try to just get as much out of that whole day as I can. And the second thing is I compartmentalize. So when I'm doing my improv, it's 100% improv. When I'm with my family, it's 100% them. When I'm with friends, it's 100% them. And that's a skill that kind of took me a while to really develop and to really get good at, I should say, in that I'm able to switch my focus completely to whatever it needs my attention at that time. And so I think that's one thing that helps. I don't let one thing bleed into the next. I don't let frustrations from improv start to pull over into my family or vice versa. And again, like that 100% attention to whatever the given task is, which for me is also the way my improv has reprogrammed my brain and kind of forcing me to stay in the moment. And then the whole time thing, I don't know if that's anything that came out of improv. That's just me. You know, there was a time after our second kid, I'm like, I still need to find time to go to the gym. There's no time during the day to go to the gym. So where can I find time? Okay, I guess it needs to be at 5:30 in the morning. So it's those things where you're just sort of chipping away at time until there is no more time to give. And that's kind of where I am right now.
Yeah. Wow. Were you already married with kids when you moved to Sarasota?
I was, yes.
Oh, so you like took the whole family unit. You were like, hey guys, what's up? We're moving from Boston to Florida. What do you think?
Yeah. And it came at a good time. You know, my wife and I were already talking about moving. But we weren't planning on making such a big move. We were kind of thinking more in the New England area.
Sure.
But it was a good thing that we were already in that space, so that when this opportunity came up, it was just an easy decision.
Yeah. And what a community to like move into, where it like somehow has this magical audience that like, you know, you need. Well, like how great. Plus everybody, certainly clearly my family considers Florida, a vacation destination. So what a great place for people to go do like improv workshops and like improv intensives. It's like, yeah, I'll go to vacation land and do it. You know, that sounds so fun. Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk to me. Clearly you're packing it tight. So I'm glad you were able to give us, an hour, to chat about how you did it. And, you have really inspired me. You've been, all the stories of the work that you're doing is just so great. And I'm just so glad you're out there making improv and keeping communities going.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you and to your audience. It means a lot. And I look forward to meeting them when I'm in Austin.
Yes, absolutely. I will make sure everybody knows the great workshops that you're going to teach and how just absolutely wonderful and fulfilling they will be. Good. Thank you so much, Will. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Yes But Why podcast.